There's those of you online or on the phone, there's a couple of handouts for tonight that would really help. I don't know if you'll be able to get them. One I emailed, but I put both of them on Tlingit.info. So now under Tlingit.info, I think there's a thing called lessons. I think I might change it to classes or something. If you hover over that, a menu pops up, and then there's beginning, intermediate, and linguistics. So under the linguistics tab, I've been just loading the handouts. So on there is the slideshow we're going to look at tonight, and also which we're going to listen to and start to sort of just comb through the language. We have the translation on one side. There's another version by Cyril George, which someday I'll work on the transcription and translation, probably with Hagwask, Ishmael Hope, the super famous Ishmael. And anyways, it's an awesome story. And what we're going to do when we go into that story, first we're just going to listen to it just to sort of read along and get the pacing and how it sounds. We've done this before with this exact same story, but you keep coming back into the same ones, I think, because you're internalizing it. A really good way to practice Tlingit, and especially with these different verb forms, is to try and retell some of these stories in Tlingit without looking at the text, And that's sort of an advanced step. A thing to start with would be just simple things, so simple things that happen to you, and you just a little small event, Yatitat, Achsik Hasim, Hitaina de Khwagu, Pasaway Hasan, Akaya Khawaki Tunach, At Hasakin. That's away, cage get. Huge cage squash. Hojin Qa'ad Kag. Aka Sikasim Kunach Khawaki Khandi Hoshi. Wait, Speak, cut. Hit da. Yitin, Gun. Away, is a team just at good, just at Hudson. Yeah, Uski at school, I know. What speak is on. Aka adach for good. Hashkay school. Atain Kananiga down. Adach good waits eat. Tend tani that connect the cake the cake. Cake yagi aya. Yagi the cut the hun yagi aya cake chuck. A hande na cooked. Aka Kashatke. Ya Chakut Hawaki Tuna Hashkai. Take the cave. Adachaya wash a cup of squash. Wash the cut of cave Haya Abuha. It's in cut. Nestachogu Dande. Has the gay Nachka. This is who? Okay. Like. A hook the idea to take the cake the car. Recycling. Echosagu was out yourself. Recycling. Cook the hen. Echosagu. About Keshwasabuti. Okay. But it can be shorter than that. So just little short things. That's why I think the perfected verbs are always good to really look at. How does it appear in that perfected form? How do you sort of line these things up sequentially? And so that's something that I started doing, especially when I started figuring out some of these, how the directional relational terms work, and then getting to verbs, and then really starting to fill in the blanks with nouns and how things tend to sort of stack up. And we get that from these stories. But then the stories are like big, big time, huge sort of things. But we can take those same philosophies and just apply them to both. So you guys all have 5 sentences today? Directional, relational term. Keep those in mind. And we're going to start talking about some of those. We're going to look a little bit more at possessive suffixes, diminutive and plural suffixes, and sort of how they function. And then just suffixes in general. We'll just keep going over. I know we did some of this a couple of years ago, but I want to do a little bit more and get us up to speed with this stuff so we can just really move ourselves up to verbs. Even if it's taken a while to maybe internalize some of these rules, it's good to just sort of to go over them again and say, okay, those are there. You can keep looking them up. You can keep looking for them. You can keep trying to use them. Because the black bear went over. He was around the house. He was right next to the house. And we can look at how these things function. And then as you listen to more Tlingit and you dive into the texts more and more, you start just looking at these words. How do they use these words? Try and spot them. So if your focus is on these directional and relational terms, you can come into one of these stories. You can photocopy if you don't want to write in the book, but whatever you want to do. And then just go through and try and hold on. Okay, any questions before we go? Okay. So for the phone, when we do this next part, I'll give you the word. And then I'll ask you to put a suffix on it. Okay, so those of you online, we're going to share the screen, and I think we're doing these slideshows. Okay, so let's go back to. So I gave you guys this handout, and so really we look at the end of a word. And there's just some rules. There's some rules that we just keep trying to internalize. And these let us know how to put a suffix on this. Let me switch over to this one real quick. Just one more in here. Okay. So looking at, there's all these different rules to suffixes, and when we talk about Tlingit linguistics, we tend to code things up so that you can look back and you can sort of try and internalize the code. So we're using V for vowel, C for consonant, things like that. So here's a couple other things just as far as vowel length and things like that go. And then it's something I struggle with, keeping the long vowels long. I tend to get into a hurry when I start speaking, and then everything starts getting really short. So there'll always be things to work on. So if it's a single consonant, like what kind of suffixes would have a single consonant? What would they mean? Right here? Nope. So it's not the possessive one. The possessive one is just adding a vowel.
So like the pinched X?
Yes, the pinched X, so to be located somewhere or to be plural. It's the same sound that does the same thing. So that's one. A T to arrive at something, to be, to be at somewhere, but really sort of specifies that it has arrived there.
Or the underline X?
The underline X
like
to
repeatedly?
To repeatedly, like it keeps coming back to this place, or it's there and it's moving around. So those are consonant endings, a single consonant ending that does not affect the vowels. It doesn't. However, if the suffix contains a vowel in any way, it will make short and high vowels long and low. Okay? It will make all short vowels long and low. So this is just something to keep in mind. If there's no vowel in the consonant, it doesn't affect it, but if there is a vowel, it will make all short consonants long and low. So short and high goes long and low, short and low goes long and low. These are just a couple of things to keep in mind so you just start to see the patterns.
What is the check mark sign for verbs? Is the one that verbs?
What's that?
Is the root?
Oh, yeah, it's a root. So this is saying like a word like kita, guina, guka, una. Those are all attached to a verb root. So guk is to dip something up. That's the word for cup. Una is to shoot something. Kita, is that what that one is? Heat.
When that slides.
Slider, right? Which is a knife. I don't know why it's slide. I guess because it cuts like kind of smooth. Because kasha was taken, right? Kasha is the saw. Chita is the broom. Right? Sometimes you're going to have ku plus verb root plus a. Kuhita, kutiya. So that ku is saying it's cylindrical, whatever it is. Which kugena, I guess, is sort of cylindrical. And then the ah is the one that does it. And then right before the ah is a verb root. So these are just sort of interesting things to keep in mind on how the language is structured. When we get to linguistics, we're always interested in how it's structured, because that tells us how to conjugate and to change these words based on what's around them. So if the word, especially if it has a double A, and you put a suffix on there, then it will change to a single A. Right, so this is something that will also happen. So kita would become akitagi. So it would go short. Right? And this is just something that tends to happen as well. Those are the sort of the vowel exceptions that I didn't have on the other slide. But I think it's a big deal, but it's also, if you get it wrong, it's not like you're going to say, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? But these are things to just keep in mind. A suffix with a vowel will affect the vowels in certain cases. Two cases are short vowels, so short vowel endings like te. So a te would be te yi, right? So it smashes it, and it makes it long. Those are things that happen. And then if it's a double A, it'll show it. So moving back to this one, going back to our possession chart, we were practicing this, and it's all about, is it rounded or not? That's one of the big things. The other rule of suffixes is if it ends with a vowel, it will always be the opposite of the tone before it. If it ends with a consonant, it will always be high. So we're kind of stacking the rules up. But when we start to look at examples, and these are other things, when we're going through these stories, we're looking for possessive suffixes, we're looking for any of these directional relational terms, and then we're going to start figuring out how we can extract them so that we can see how fluent speakers use them, and we can just mimic them, and we're starting to make language. So we've got open and closed, rounded or not rounded. The tricky ones are kind of any combination of U or double O, high tone or low tone, doesn't matter. And any of the G, K, or X varieties, any of them, underlined, pinched, any combination of them, those will always be rounded. That's why cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. Right? So whenever that's just the way it's going to go. So we just sort of keep in mind that those sounds are sort of all grouped together. They're all grouped together. They're all these sort of back of the throat type of
Does the K change to a G ever?
Yes, and so also on the right-hand side, we see consonants that will become voiced. So all of those, that list of consonants there, they're the exact same sound, except you're turning your vocal cord on. So if it's surrounded by it, you're just going to leave it on. And just like in English, you wouldn't say zebras, say zebras, because your vocal cords are on, so you just leave them on. So even though the rules seem complicated, a lot of it is just about language finds the easiest way, right? So if it's awkward to make the sound, usually it'll find a solution. And this is where you get a lot of these different things. And so again, so we got CH and J, and then the V is just vowel. There's some vowel ending on it, depending on whether it's rounded or not. So the next thing to think about is diminutive plural and the diminutive plural. And so these, honestly, they're not used a whole lot, but they are good to know. Well, the Kresani is used actually quite a bit. So for example, te is rock. Take could be a little rock. Take could be a bunch of rocks. Kresani is pebbles. Right. So, and this one is used in different stories and things like that to talk about pebbles. And so what we see is, and it's pretty straightforward. But what we see is that if we think of this sort of slot machine concept, that there's certain slots for certain things. And in this in the slot can go certain things. So if there's something there, you couldn't have something else there.
Like decimal.
Yeah, exactly. So in the ones position, you might have, or in the first position, you would have the word itself, the noun. In the second position, you would have diminutive and plural. In the third position, you would have possessive. So you can have possessive and diminutive. You have possessive and plural. You cannot have diminutive and plural, which is why the sani is on there, right? So you can't have both of them. So it gets kicked out and it becomes sani.
What does son mean?
It means little, but usually it's usually always used in terms of, in addition to the plural.
Is it used for the kinship term too?
We say anyad kusani,
Yeah.
and that means little children of the land, which is a term, I was recently educated on this one. It's a term you typically use when you're visiting people and you're addressing them on their own land. So you were a visitor on that land, you were talking to the people who are from there, and you're saying, and it means noble people, kind of is how you translate it. But it literally means little children of the land. And so you see it there. It's in some names like Shakasani, it's in there. And then what you've got with that letter I right there, so we see we have cake, Kasani. That I is just it's a peg vowel. That's all it is. Because it's hard to get, you can kick sani. Like you have to, if you had to just totally stop everything. So the vowel is just there. It's totally meaningless. It just helps you to get to the next sound. All right, so let's all say cake. Now if you see that little dot, cake. With the plural, now it's interesting because what Crippen has been finding out is you wouldn't say like 2 dogs, 3, it doesn't automatically pluralize if there's more than one. If you can count them, you usually don't pluralize it. So a lot of speakers would say gin cut cake, and that's just fine. There's 10 dogs. But then the would go on there when there's maybe too many to count, or you're not even bothering counting. I'm saying there's some plural number of them. Right? So there's a bunch of dogs up there. Cake. And cake is sani.
Kisani.
If you use the number with it, do you then not pluralize the noun?
Yeah, you usually don't. You usually don't. Although I think a lot of speakers, it's sort of optional, I think. You don't have to. Whereas in English, you do. You wouldn't say, I saw 7 dogs yesterday. But
Either way,
learn how
it's
to speak
okay.
English. What's that?
It's okay either way then.
Yeah, it's okay either way. And so it seems to be if there's more than you could count easily, then you would add it.
It's a weird rule for English though, 'cause you could say I saw 10 deer or 10 sheep or 10,
Right.
10 bear.
Moose.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there are some nouns that they don't have a plural form. Right, and there are also some nouns who actually change. Right, and these are things we've had to learn. I don't know if there's a rule behind it. Mice. Why is it mice? Geese. Anyways. Okay. Kepisani.
Kisani.
And we have without it. Dasawete kakina tashk. Tashk. Isekuke. Tashk. Kind of like a gopher or a ground squirrel. Tashk. Especially in the inland, you know. Make jackets out of it.
Groundhog Day,
Yeah.
just like my home show.
Tashkhan is the name for Mount Fairweather.
Oh.
Ground squirrel land, gopher land. Marmot. Marmot is Sach.
I should.
So there's the L in there, which is Sash. But I don't know if Sashkhan becomes Sashkhan or some contraction going on. Or Marmot had be. Ah, yeah, it would be Tzach. Yeah. Okay, so Sashk. They're all little. But I don't know, I guess if there's one that's like extra little. So cute. And the K is kind of cute. It's all cute. Pinchable. You know, might bite your hand. Sashk. Sashk. Plural. Sashk. Sashk. Sashk Isani.
Kisani.
Sashk Isani.
Kisani.
So of course I picked some hard ones and you sort of see what you're in for sometimes when you start adjusting. And you get to see these repeating consonants quite a bit. There's other languages that do worse than that. But I try to think of some good ones. Kok. That's the way to kakenach kok. Yeah, it's a swamp. So when you see one, it's like kok. It's fun. Oh, and I think that's an underlined G. I don't know why. Oops.
It is an analogy?
Should be.
Because it's not hard enough.
Yeah. Wait a minute. That's easy. I want to show you guys. So this is a good time. There's a program that I found out about through Theosh called Popcar. Popchar. And I don't know how it works on a PC, but on a Mac, it installs this little letter P up in the top left corner. And when you click on it, you can put these characters in there. I don't know, I got to talk to some of these linguist folks and see. There's this one right down here. You got to scroll down to this category called combining diacritical marks. And there's one that is called a combining macron below. That's the one that Crippen is using on his keyboard. But it comes up kind of short on a lot of fonts. So I've been using this one right next to it, combining low line, and that just throws it on there. Not all fonts will like it, and not all programs will like it. So we're still trying to figure out what to do with some of these underlines. But once you use it once, I'm finding you can copy and paste it. So it's pretty pretty handy. The different programs, so like when I'm using Microsoft Word or Mac Pages or any of those type of software suites, I can just copy and paste once I put it in there. It puts the underline on the G below the G, which is fantastic. But when I work in InDesign or some of the Adobe InDesign, I have to copy the G and then copy the space right next to it because it's technically a character just to the right of the G, goes underneath. And then it doesn't work for like Photoshop and Illustrator, which is annoying.
Is there a standard for capitalization in Tlingit? Like what you do you just bring that over from English and see English capitalization?
It's usually brought over from English. A lot of times when I write in Tlingit, I don't capitalize, but I'm not exactly sure why. Usually people just follow standard English. Okay. Cook. It's little. Cook. Cook. And there's a bunch of them. Cook. Cook. Oh, there's a bunch of little ones. Cook. Isan. Cook. Isan. Cook. Isan. In on haaniye duasap kut adat ayashia dehin hanak Waisha adach aya wedu yes taks aya taks in Hajaya Akausaku. Yes, a taks yak to slip. A chawe taks to a sap, yet to yak the tea. Chago away at which it leak. A day aya wa peak. Connect with the clue. We shall decide away. Shake. Aya food awning aya shake. That's the way they come enough shake. Shake. That's for everybody today. It's a red snapper.
Red snapper?
I also call it yellow eye.
Yeah.
It's a rockfish. Pull it up, it's all inside. It's all sorted out. He can't decompress like a halibut. The halibut can decompress, so you pull him up from his fiber. Snapper, you pull him up when it's pretty much gone. That's comfortable. Anyways, so it's called Tlingit. What's that?
It's a mountain.
So there's a mountain just, if you're looking over Chilkoot Lake to the right, it's a mountain there, and it's called Tlingit. Tlingit. And if there was a bunch of them. And there's a bunch of little ones. Isani. Any questions? These are like the hardest ones up there. That's why I figured. So let's just do a few of these. We'll go around the room. I don't know if the audio works on the phone or on the computer. Anybody try to talk to me to see if it works?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, in the dictionary it's not underlined, but I do believe it's underlined. I'll double check Chish Kadanja. Okay, I don't know where we left off. We'll just sort of randomly go down. These are all nouns from lesson 1. You could have done it. That's why I still did that one. Okay, how much stuff did I had a dentist, he put all this stuff in my mouth, and he didn't want to talk. I'm like, there's like 6 things in my mouth, why do I have to do 6 things? I think we did this one. We'll start with this. So there's going to be a noun on the screen, and when we get to shaku'ish, I'll tell you what it is in English. And the first thing I'd like for you to be able to do is tell me what it's called in Tlingit. And then, I need to make a note. So then what will happen is I will ask you for either the possessive form, or the plural form, or the diminutive form, or the diminutive plural form. I'm not going to combine, I can combine possessive with any of those other 3, but it'll just be one of those 4. Just one second. Everybody get yourself ready? Okay. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How would you possess it?
Yagu.
Okay. That's okay. What if it was tiny? It can happen.
That's a name.
That's okay.
Cheech.
Cheech. Remember, we can always signal uncertainty in other ways, but we cannot do it with tone. Cannot. There's a bunch of them.
Cheech.
That's just the hard one.
That's okay. It's not hard.
Tlingit English, or English. I don't know what that is.
Oh,
I don't know the quick English.
yep.
Sorry.
That's that.
Urban, you know what an urban is?
No.
Like
We don't have those.
they turn white. Yeah, they have enhanced.
I've never seen
They
it.
turn well. They're sneaky.
I'm like,
Who does? I've never. I don't know.
Well, the reason why they're so valuable is because they're so hard to catch. Because they're really intelligent. That's what I've heard. But they turn white in the winter, and you catch them, and you make hats out of them. Shucky hats and jackets and everything.
Ow.
So I picture a robe.
Yeah, George Reynolds has one. Or no, he has a tunic. Isikuge dasawe shingehe na. Like, da, da. Okay, so if there's a bunch of little tiny ones.
God keep sunny.
Okay. Dasawe. Yeah. Oh, is that? Okay. Oh, right there. I don't know. Would you pluralize that? Because they're all like different things, but they're all yeah. I think you would. I don't know.
Can't roll with it.
That blew my mind. I can't deal with it. And we're just gonna. I don't think you can make it small, so let's just possess it.
What can you make a glass of?
Okay, let's make it small. Right. There you go.
Well, I remember
I guess maybe like a little teeny, like an eyedropper for
Marsha Hutch said when we were at Fred Meyer,
Mhm.
we were going through the aisles and there were like tiny bottles of water, like this big, and she was like,
Perfect. There you go. Question has been answered. And if there's a bunch of them? Jan-
Cocaine.
And if there's a bunch of little ones? Yeah, but then the little, so a bunch of little ones. It's Kisan.
Sounded?
Yeah, Kakin Kisan. Okay, okay.
The Wolverine.
It's Wolverine. Yisukuge daso shingeki news. Episode's got put that up for you. So, how would you possess it? Say, nusku. And then you'd be torn to shreds. Okay, Kadunja. You eat Haku? Yisukuge?
Tasa?
Well, I don't, we're in whisper mode. You're right. Yeah. Sock.
Sock.
And to have little ones, they're already little, but say it's just like super tiny.
Sock.
Right. You guys know how you eat these? Everybody know how to eat these? Yeah, there's some folks that came down from Carcross at my grand. They were good friends with my grandma, and they said we've always wanted to try it, hula again. We want to see what it's like. And so my grandma got her a bag of it, and then the next time they came back like a month later, she's like, "How was it?" Like, it was great, but it took us like 3 hours to fillet all this one things. Like, you just eat them, eat the whole thing.
Eat that on first, isn't it?
What's that?
How do people cook that?
Well, yeah, so a lot of times you can smoke them, but a lot of times when people get them, you just put them in flour and just fry them. It's good. Okay, hinta question, yitwa.
Shaw.
Shaw. And if there were a bunch of them?
Shaw.
No, those would be little ones, just a bunch of them.
Oh.
Tia.
And a bunch of little ones?
Tia.
Yeah, so, but this would be one of those Tia, so it actually, the would go it would go short. Tia kusan. Okay? Shakoish. There is a cow on the screen. Wasadu Tlingit Linguistics.
Matsud.
Wow. And if you were to own it, how would you say it?
Achmatsusi.
Yeah, away. Do one more. One more round. You eat the dishy. Go.
The muscle?
Mm-hmm. Beginning Tlingit was a long time ago.
You were doing this today with your class. Subsequently.
Oh, okay. You say good game? Yeah. And if it's little?
Yeah.
Seek.
Oh, this is the second one. And if there's a bunch of them?
Seek.
Let's try to be a little louder, everybody. Try to be a little louder.
Donna.
Mm-hmm. I guess. Sure, we got a bunch of little ones. Why not?
Ganakisan.
Mhm.
Would the A's hit short?
That one it would.
We use that for ones versus like 20s.
You probably could.
What else?
Maybe pennies. Danaki-san. Pennies.
I forget.
Ah. It's never a bad time to drill nouns. Basically, kaboot.
Kaboot.
Okay, so own it.
I don't know that I can't. Ugh. Kabuti? Would I change the T? I'm not sure.
Yes. So what is
Oh, D.
D?
Ugh, Kabuti.
Ah, kabuti. Good. Yeah, so this. I guess it was really tiny. We shaved it into a little tiny morsel of itself. Just this. Hmm?
Disc.
Oh, disc. Disc golf.
I'm bad at trees.
Uh-oh. Hikking hosaku aswan. Yisukuge? Keishish. And a bunch of them?
A bunch of small ones or
Just a bunch of them.
Okay. Keish.
Keishish.
It's not 9 or 80.
Is it?
That's right.
Oh, awesome. Keishish. Okay, we're not gonna, I guess, where were we at? Okay, yeah, sure, let's go for it. And if there are a bunch of little ones, I guess, I don't know why. Maybe like a little bunch of ant towns or something.
Is that it?
Oops. My nouns go. There's more. Oh, that's it? Ooh. Go back to the top. Oh, wait, hold on. I know what to do. Okay. Let me go with this. Geesh. So you're gonna make it yours. Ach, geesh. That one's not gonna work. Gun. It's gun. That's not gonna work. Okay. That'll.
Cost.
Yes. Cost. Good. So if you were going to make it small,
Cost.
cost. And gun, you couldn't make it plural because it's just, it could be plural or single. It's not spider. Kadunja.
Shayet.
Shagit. Shagit. And let's make it small, a whole bunch of little ones.
Shayet.
Hey. Anybody break that down? How's it work? Shagit. 3 parts to it. 3 different little words.
Shah is head.
Sha is head.
T.
T is
Sitting.
It's a good guess. There's 2 things when you add them up, you'll always get gate. You're going to see them in quite a few places. Ye It's ut. Yi means below. Ut means thing. Thing below the head.
The opposite of Shakia.
Yeah, right. So you can have both. You want Shakia, but you want to lay down with that on. Okay. Hinta question.
T.
Own it.
Yeah, right?
Achidi.
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 Good. Got 2 team.
Ton.
So we want this ton. Make it small.
Ton.
Okay. Shakuish, there is a sea cucumber on the screen. Wasadosa can get enough. Okay. And to say a whole bunch of them. Each A plus. Someone was presenting in one of my classes spring semester and then did like a little Simshan lesson, maybe it was fall. And she said Yain was the Simshan word for cloud. And that was just the most awesome thing because I just had sea cucumbers floating through the sky for me all day. Okay, any questions? Everybody okay? Everybody okay? All right, here we go. So now let's talk a little bit about these locational and directional terms. So trying to really sort of nail these things down, both in terms of one, what they are, how they generally function, and then two, looking at these huge lists and just committing them to memory. And it's kind of what you got to do. So I think I always say this, like, or at least I say it a lot. When I was learning Tlingit, we didn't have lists like this. We had to just find them and figure it out. So there. Okay. So as far as figuring out what to call these, I sort of waffle around, and I'll probably continue to change. But for now, when we talk about directional and relational terms, or location and direction, which is really, it all comes down to relation, or where it's at, where is it going, those types of things. You have independent bases, relational bases, and location suffixes. So that's really, and regardless of what we call them, we have bases and suffixes. There's 2 types of bases, and we'll take a look at those right now. Just shout out any questions if you got any. But there's about 10 slides, and then we'll do. We'll start doing mosquito. We'll probably have to pick it up next week. So we talked about this before. There are 3 senses of space in Tlingit, right? So the first one is where things are in relation to the speaker. Near me, it's over there, it's way over there. And it's always relative to the speaker. There are also time references. So, we've seen these. We'll take a look at them again, but they can mean right now, sometime, or long time from now, or long time ago. The second one is how objects are related to each other, right? So it's one thing, and it's related to one other thing, right? And that's why it's a relational base, because it needs something to exist with. It has to be relative to something, where the independent bases can just exist on their own. They're just understood, well-known sort of areas. And then the third one is everything's related to the shore, where the ocean is. And so we'll take a look at all 3 of those. So the first one we look at is these, what we call determiners, because they help determine where something is. And there's 4 of them. Ya, he, we, and you. You're going to see them all over the place, and sometimes they exist on their own. Sometimes they sort of take the place of articles. What are articles in English?
The?
Mm-hmm.
Or no?
That's one of them. And there's one other. Yeah,
Yeah.
or and, the. Sometimes I guess you could argue the is sort of a different one, right? And so those are just saying whether it's a specific object or some unspecified object, right? They call it indefinite and definite articles. And Tlingit doesn't use articles. It doesn't. So when you start doing word-for-word translations, it gets awkward, and you want to put the articles in there usually to make it flow in English. And sometimes these are used because you might say, wait, that black bear, he walked back, you know. And maybe it's something that we've already been talking about, so it gets the wet. Or in some cases, yay, niche, good, yay. So when you start using ya with yay, that means you're usually talking about capital R raven from the stories. Raven. But usually it's just sort of specifying some sort of direction and where things are in relation to the speaker. So the immediate space is ya, like right here. He is here, but it's a little bit further out. Or it could be this sort of somewhat unknown space, like something scratching around. We can hear it, but we're not exactly sure where it is. Or right behind you, perhaps. We is just this general sort of space. I gotta sort of walk there, but it's not too far. And then you, we think of over yonder, but really it means, like all of that would be you, I think. Because I'd have to walk out and go there to pick something up. It's pointing outside the building. So some examples, some way that we hear this is yadu, right? So if we say yadu gukha, the gukha is right here. But if I said gusa gukha, and for some reason it's not here, yadu becomes yad. And that's getting to a suffix, which we'll talk about in a second. But these are things that you just sort of remember. And this is why you say kuhida achjiwu when you're holding a pencil. But if you're not, kesh achji, right? You don't say kesh achjiwu. And we'll get to the reason behind that. Other ways is awe. And awe is like a super awesome functional word in Tlingit. It has all these different uses. Sometimes it's just signaling that I'm still talking. Right, I'm talking in Tlingit, and I say, oh, wait. And that's really saying, I'm going to think about this a little bit, but I'm still talking. It's still my turn. Or it might say, I'm getting ready to talk. And I'm saying this so you guys will start listening to me. It's also used just as sort of a pause, or it helps link words together. It's such an interesting word. There's a similar one that I think is a different word. Like if you go to a function and somebody's there calling out clan names, you say, oh, wait. So it's longer at the front. And that's just sort of a response saying, like, we hear you. Thank you. Yes, we're here.
Do you think that's different than awe?
I think so. Because it's long.
How would you transcribe that?
I would say long, high tone A, W, high tone E.
So A, W.
Right. Because if I go to functions, sometimes we'll say, oh, wait. But usually they say, oh, wait. And so maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe it's a high-toned A as its own word, and then another, I'm not exactly sure how to break it down, but in my mind it sounds. Heyday is another one. So, you hear heyday, shugach tutan, heyday shutan, heyday shinatan wechahat, open the door, right? Pull it towards this area. Another one is weidach. So what we're doing is we're starting to add some suffixes and some other things on there, which changes. Dasayu or dasaya or dasawe, yagay. So these are some examples of how it's done. You just see them all over the place, and we just understand. There's one, could also be the face of something. Awe, aya, ayu usually means that is, this is, that way over there. The fifth one is used not quite as often, and it's ha. Sounds exactly like the ha as in the possessive, plural first person possessive. Ha shaginya, ha shagunya, ha ani. But ha, this one means like the space around us, right? So this is the vicinity that we're located in. So in this case, it would be if somebody's walking towards us, we might use this one. And hade, when you use that at a ku'ik, or hagu, it's also there. It's saying, come over here to this area. If you wanted to be more specific, you might say, achani naku, come and be right beside. Hande ijin, and give me your hand. Hak iyagut, you have arrived here. Nichish hak yiguti, you hear that as well. Hadadushi, it was interesting because Keishi basically was the one who explained it to us through Zeus. That Hada is like that cat that's around us. That wolf that's around us, which is tiger and lion or mountain lion. Okay, so now we get into the independent bases, and the best thing to do is really just keep looking at these lists. Maybe someday I'll make like a portable version of them so you just carry them around. But at least the lists are there. So you can narrow something. So part of it might be if you're, you can look, most of these are in Edwards Dictionary, Crippen in his Tlingit Verbal Structure Handbook, which is amazing, just has a huge list of them. He's got almost all of them listed, I think, on just one page. So you just take a look and find them really quick. But these, they can exist on their own. They don't need any other noun. They really refer to very specific places in the world. It's not, it could take suffixes on, but it generally wouldn't take on another relational, it wouldn't take on any type of other base, right? So, so there's a bunch of them here, the ki, the kina, the kinde, the yi, the yina, the yinde, na ki, the ki, da, dakka, ikka, ik, dak, deki, yan, diya, kya, ne, gan, kuch, and kuch. And so, but we can see how they're used. And some of them are, and these, they get to be really important because when we get to motion verbs, the type of bases and suffixes are going to determine what type of motion it is. That's going to tell you how to conjugate the verb. So we'll look at those lists a little bit later. The second one is the relational base. In the Edwards Dictionary, you'll see these usually listed with, like that first one, da. Let's say, da. So there'd be an A before it, which is not in bold. Crippen uses an M dash right before it, which is just telling you there has to be a noun there. There has to be a noun. Sometimes it'll use pronouns, like you could say, Achkatsu daku satan. It's raining on me, right? And so achkat, that works. There are other cases where you want to use the empty base. We'll get to the empty base. And again, these can take suffixes, but they can't take another relational base, at least as far as I know. And so here's, when I put these lists together, I try to think of the ones that are used sort of most commonly, and then the ones that aren't used necessarily as much. And that's just sort of going by memory and what I've seen. A couple conversations with other teachers and linguists. And these lists, they come from the Downhowers. They were collecting them. Carrie's been collecting them. James has been collecting them. So it's really just reprinting the information that they've gathered. Jeff Lear's been collecting. And so you're going to see these a lot. Ite, it's a huge one. The remains of something, right? So like when the glacier recedes, sit ite, that's the name for Glacier Bay. It's the bay where the glacier used to be, right? Its remains. If you built a fire and then it went out, somebody came back like 6 months later, the ground still might be charred. Gan ite, right? The remains of the fire. Who's ite? Did you have it? Yeah. Who's ite? His footprints, right? The remains of his feet. Right, and so we're going to see the other thing with these relational terms We'll look at the stories, which we won't have time to do today. But we'll look at the stories and we'll try and find them. The other thing we'll do is we'll start looking at body parts and place names. Tom Thornton is here next week. He's doing a place name presentation, which I have a poster for somewhere.
You going to class?
I don't know. I invited him. I told him he better do his homework before he comes in here. But I said an invitation, but I don't know if he's coming. He might. Wednesday afternoon, I believe it's 1 to 3. There's going to be a place name workshop. Friday evening, I think at 7. Next week, the evening at Egan, he's the main presenter. And then there'll be a time, I'll send an email out to you guys, but there's a time where you can set up a one-on-one session if you want to. Visiting scholar, it's a chance to just sit and talk with him. His knowledge of place names and of Tlingit culture is really good. You can't get into some sort of specific language questions, and he's not a Tlingit speaker, even though he knows a lot about how the language functions. But it's really exciting, because in the place names, you're going to see a bunch of these things as well.
Would there be a way of setting that, because we have that room still, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would there be a way of setting that up as like, on like, one of the days where he's here, kind of like a, like you said, he has time to do that, but would there be time to set that up as kind of a group thing?
Maybe, but I think it's the UAF science program that's located at the NOAA facility that I think is actually bringing it. But I can ask.
I mean, I'd be interested in doing it. I feel like I wouldn't want to like take an hour of his time, but I don't have any specific things I'm working on with that, so I think it'd be kind of.
Well, even if it was just 15 minutes or something, I mean, and if anything, we wouldn't want him to come here and then everybody's shy about spending time with him, so nobody signs up. So if you want to, just I'll send the information out to you guys tonight. If you don't get it by the morning, somebody let me know. So try to remember them. And then, yeah, it's exciting. But anyways, back to this stuff. These relational bases, and sometimes they're talking about direction, right? Like right next to something. And this is where the name, a lot of clan names and place names come from. The other thing to think about, lost my train of thought. So there's a bunch of these. Oh no. So they're not always just location, but they're also relation, right? So someone might say, "What displain ayagahan?" Maybe I think there's a full moon tonight. Yehwaji. And someone might say, Yehwaji akinawe. I think it's less than a full moon. Akin is less than. A yanach is more than. And so the other thing about learning how to use these things, with all of these directional things, one of the things that I used to do is I would use in place of whatever the noun was. And then I always put the noun in afterwards, right? So I might say, we're going to talk about it, our language, which is fine, but right? We're talking about our language, right? So the replacing that with a noun. So sometimes having it as a hyphen might work better because you think, well, there's that hyphen, I got to put something else there. So we'll see them. It's good to just look at this list, start looking for them. You'll see shagun, shuka, all these things that become huge words. Because sometimes the literal meaning is different than the cultural meaning, right? So you could say, if you're in a boat and there's a cheech in the water swimming and it's right in front of the boat, you might say, Hayanku shaka away cheech, there's a porpoise right in front of our boat. It's really swimming. Ya shuka in front of the boat. So if you say ha shuka, again, that means everything that's ever been, everything that ever will be, and everything that is right now. And it also means our ancestors. It also means our future generations. So some of them, they just become these huge terms, but they're talking about these relationships. And we'll see how they pop up all over the place. in stories, and also just in words as well. There's all kinds of words where you'll see them. Ka, kus, ek, up, ki. Tojang. It's an awesome word. So then we get to the suffixes, and there's really not a whole lot of them. So what we end up with is a whole bunch, there's quite a few of these independent bases, there's a whole bunch of these relational bases, which makes sense. Like there's these fixed points in the world, but then there's how these two things might relate to each other. And then there's suffixes we could put on. And so we look at these suffixes, we get to know them, we get to learn them, we memorize them so that whenever we spot them, we understand how they're functioning. Because these ones especially, a lot of the motion verbs and a lot of the other verbs, that indicate going towards something, whether it's motion or not, they would be day in all future forms and t in a lot of the perfected forms. But we'll look at those verbs and we'll start to sort of pull them apart. So when we go through and we come back Tuesday, we'll listen to the mosquito story. We'll all sort of read it. We want to spot all of the directional relational terms we can. We also want to spot the verbs and the verb pairs. We're always looking for those. So, here's a couple of just sort of illustrations. We'll get some of these in the room, so we're always thinking about that. And this one is specifically dealing with the prefix, the suffixes, and how they work, going towards something or away from something. There are also relational terms on here. So you could say yikde, yikt, yik, and you can attach these on there. All right. So we went over the suffix rules, vowels, how they change. These are the rules of possession. And again, coming back to rules of suffixes in general. With tone, if it ends with a vowel, it will always be the opposite of the tone before it. If it ends with a consonant, and it usually goes consonant, vowel, consonant, it will always be short and high. The suffix itself. You guys want the empty bases? Empty base. Boom, I just used one. Okay, so with pronouns and with kinship terms especially, you cannot attach suffixes to those. And also names, you cannot attach suffixes to those. Clan names, you cannot attach suffixes to those. So what you have is you end up with an empty base, E. And usually some sort of possessive form before it, so it's looking exactly like ownership of something. And then you've got E, and you can attach any of those suffixes on there. And so it just exists there so you can put a pronoun. So you can say in, you're going to tell me, right? Okay. So here's the suffixes sort of in action. I can say, Yi'in kahwani, I told you. I'ide kahwani, I'm going to tell you. So the E is still there, but it went from N to day. The future form, so it hasn't made it to you yet, but it's going to. Right, so this is how we start thinking about how they function in the verbs. And we just keep an eye out for them, right? Once we see them, they're not too scary. It's always going to be some pronoun in E or some kinship term, right? I told my mom I love her. There are a couple of them that contract. They can sometimes create some problems. They don't always contract. That came out really tiny for some reason. We'll just fix that. There. So if you have in with something, you get on. This can create some problems because sometimes it sounds exactly like land. That's just the way it is. So you just look at the context. If you can't figure out what that word is, and it's probably with something, right? Khan. So you could say, and this one seems to be interchangeable. You say, in Kananik, tell me. Or you could say, Khan Kananik, Khan Kananik. Ka'in, this one usually contracts to kun, right? So you could say, kun khashitu. I'm teaching people. And then tu'in, tun. That one I don't see very much. We say ha'in instead of tun. I don't see that too much, but I've seen it in a few places. So the last one, and then we're out of time, is the shore-based system. And so where the ocean meets the shore, and this works whether you're dakka or ekka. So there's a number of things that are really just, and these are all, most of them they're independent as well. They don't need to relate to anything because they automatically relate to this place that we all know. So there's ik, which is going from the inland to the shore. Dak, which is going from the shore out to sea. The key, which is going way out to sea. The ya, which would be crossing something, usually a body of water, but it could be, the other side of the room. It could be something like that. And then returning, yan is the shore. Going to the shore from the sea. Dak is going to the inland from the shore. And then you get some other things. Askatu yik is going into the forest. Neich is going into a house. So with neich, there's the directional term, neich go. And then there's the noun, ach neichi de naku. So those are a little bit different. Yi is also into a building of some sort. Naki is north, Ichki is south. They're also upstream and downstream, which is where those come from. Ik is the base of something. Isani, that's a word for like teenagers. And Nora explained it to me. She says, because they're all spine, they're little tree trunks. Isani. Kinde is up, Yinde is down. Ka is on top of, it's also just a vertical or horizontal surface. The ki is way up above. De yi is way down below. Ta yi is underneath something.
The place name on Admiralty that's Tyee, it's across from Kubernetes.
Nice. Yeah, and place names are so fun to talk about. I was talking to someone in Skagway. They said, "Well, where does the name Dai come from?" I said, "It comes from Deya, the pack trail." I said, "Well, where does Tai come from?" It comes from Deya, the pack trail. Well, where does Dai come from? And we just kept going back. I was like, they both come from this one word. For some reason, that's like the easiest word. Deya. Like yap deya. That's it. I'm out of time. Cheesh. 5 sentences. Bring 5 sentences that have relational terms. Go over those on Tuesday. We'll do talk. We'll mine for these things. We'll have all kinds of fun. Cheesh.